All right, we're going to go back to what we were looking at before. We're going to continue our list of reasons why you need to understand the task. And one of them is they're just always more complex than they seem. So, Wendy Mackay is a famous researcher from Paris, or living in Paris at least right now. And when she was, I think it was in their 80s, she was looking at air traffic controllers. And they have this weird, antiquated system. I love telling this story. I don't know why. Just she's always looking at replacing paper. And they have this weird, antiquated system where they have a little strip of paper, like a long, thin strip of paper, that they write information on. They'll get this little printout about the flight that they're supposed to have. They're supposed to land. They're going to help land this plane. And it's a piece of paper with the flight information on it. And the air traffic controllers were fighting tooth and nail about getting rid of this system. They're trying to digitize this system, and they did not want anything to do with it. So Wendy explores and studies why they're complaining about using this system. Turns out you get a piece of paper, and you start writing other additional information on the little strip of paper. It's going to be thrown out later, but the pertinent information for you landing this plane right now, you don't need it permanently, but little current pertinent information, you doodle on the piece of paper. Not only that, but who is responsible for landing that plane? The person with the little strip of paper is. If you have that strip of paper, that plane's your responsibility. Nobody else has that strip of paper, therefore you and only you land that plane. It gives a very, very clear understanding of control. Because the worst thing you can do, is have someone go like, oh, I thought Bob was landing that plane. Whoopsie, right? You do not want that. So the handoff of this strip of paper as it goes from air traffic controller to air traffic controller. If you need to pass it off to someone, you pass them a sheet of paper with your little notes on it. And eventually they land the plane. And a piece of paper doesn't crash either. There's a whole slew of reasons why you want the strip of paper. And if you don't know that, and you just force them to do it one way, you get a problem. One of my other favorite things is that when submarines in the US went digital, instead of this periscope coming down and it being like a series of mirrors that popped up, it was a periscope and it indirectly went to this little dashboard on the front of a navigator screen. And submarines kept on running into things. And you go, why were people running into things? Well, they knew where the submarine was pointed. They knew where they were pointed relative to the submarine, and they knew where they were looking based on the periscope. They would move around the periscope. And if you have a screen down here and you rotate on the screen, your body relative to the screen does not move. You're solving the wrong problem, and you run into things because you don't have the perception of where you are in space. I love this one. For me, this is a personal, like, I'm old kind of thing. My students pointing out the fact that, and people my age don't necessarily know this, how many of you put a period at the end of a text message or any kind of punctuation at the end of your text messages? That blew my mind. It's something that's completely unwritten. It's something that people don't necessarily talk about. Your mom and dad are probably putting periods at the end of their text messages. My dad says, sincerely, Bill Sprague, right? That is, the level of formality. It's not just a level of formality, though. It's indicating something. It's another piece of information. That period says you took the time to put a period in there. You're pissed off. That is huge. And yet, it's unwritten. And the data science pipeline, 80% of that time is just cleaning the damn data. The task is always more complex than you might think. And so understanding that task requires a deep, heavy understanding. You can't get it right just by, guessing. Your task itself dictates the need. So to figure out what people are doing, how people move around the world, what their needs are, that takes time to confirm. Exploring the data is also a very, very messy and unknown situation. So if I'm exploring a bunch of data, let's say I'm trying to do a math proof, for example, as a different example, or I'm trying to code something, it's a messy situation. I need something lightweight that I can play around with. And if I try and do heavyweight things, so if I ask you to design a visualization right now, it doesn't have to actually be a visualization. And I've had this with a couple of my students last term. I ask you to design a visualization right now. And they say, I'm as good using paint as I am drawing on paper. And they quickly learn they are not. Right? If I ask you to draw something in paint, in the paint program, you'll be like, draw this line, draw that line. If I ask you to doodle something on a piece of paper, what do? You scratch, 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 done. Right? It's fast, it's lightweight, and if you're worried about throwing it up, no, it's a doodle. You can reproduce it. You crumple it up, you throw the ball of paper away. If I'm doing a lightweight exploration, it is very different than the confirmation approach later on. And understanding those differences is critical for understanding what you need to present to people. What phase you're in changes the approach. And of course, this is one of those classic terms that the HCI community uses, right? Focus on the user, and you are not the user. I always forget the name of it. It is the false consensus principle. This is the idea that many of you invariably will do this term. I do. My wife does way too often. The false consensus principle goes like this. I would do it this way, therefore my users will do it this way. It's complete bullshit. That is not how things work. You are not the user. If I'm trying to design Gmail, I'm trying to make an email program for average everyday people, the programmer is not the average everyday person. If you get the programmer to design let's say an operating system, you get Linux. You don't get the Mac, you do not get Windows, you get Linux, right? Because they are they're thinking of the world in a very different way than the average person. You are not necessarily the user. You might be your end user, but frequently you're not. And if you're making a visualization, you're certainly not the end user. And so you need to understand what their actual tasks are, because even if you don't understand it, they do. They understand their task. They do not have the tools for it yet. So, from a pragmatic standpoint, if you can't, from my perspective, at the end of the day, if you can't clearly state what the task is, and the task that you're proposing for this project is believable, so it needs to be a clear and believable task. If it is not, I will ask you to change your project. That is going to sound harsh, perhaps, or maybe you didn't understand what I'm trying to say here. If you take some random data, like, I'll go back to it again, sledding hills in Ottawa, and I say, why are you showing sledding hills in Ottawa? Why are you analyzing sledding hills in Ottawa? And you say, well, maybe people want to know where to go for a sled, when they go sledding in the wintertime. No, not going to work. Why? Well, am I going to drive in my car for 20, 30, 40 minutes all the way to Canada to go to a sledding hill in Canada? No. Am I going to go to some other sledding hill that is 5 miles away? Not really. I want to know the sledding hills around me. Maybe the conditions around the sledding hills around me. That might be useful. But you don't really need a visualization for that sort of thing. If I wanted all the sledding hills in Ottawa to figure out how frequently they're used, because if I'm figuring out if I'm a City of Ottawa councillor and I'm trying to figure out how many more sledding hills we need in the Ottawa area, or officially sanctioned sledding hills that we need in the City of Ottawa area to make my constituents happy, great. That seems like a task that makes sense. But you need to be able to look at your task and go like, yeah, someone's going to want to do that, or I would want to use it for this reason. If it's for your thesis and for your dissertation, and this system will help you do that, that is a pragmatic, clearly stated task that you're trying to build, and it's definitely believable. Great. But you can't just make something up, and if there's no if you build it, they will come that will work for you. So just because you can make a visualization about sledding hills in Ottawa doesn't mean that you should. You have to clearly understand what the task is, and that task is believable, that someone actually wants to do this. Okay. So, again, I'm going to take a little bit of a pause here because I've been rambling a bit. When we come back, we're going to look at tasks one more time. We have two more little mini videos here. One looking at the actual P2, and then more about tasks themselves. Right? Talk to you soon, guys.